The carpet was too soft beneath my heels, sinking under my weight like it wanted to pull me down. Make me disappear. I stood at the edge of the banquet hall, the chandelier above, casting jagged light across the faces of my family. My neighbors, the entire town, gathered for my cousin Lila's wedding reception. Their laughter bubbled up sharp and bright like the champagne in their glasses. Conversations wove through the air stories of promotions, new houses, children who'd gone off to college. I held my purse, its leather worn and peeling from years of use, a thrift store find I'd chosen for its practicality. My fingers tightened around it, the only thing grounding me. They hadn't saved me a seat. My name is Harper Moore, and I'm telling you this because I need you to feel what it's like to be invisible. Not just overlooked, but erased, like your shadow doesn't even deserve to fall across their floor. I was 48, and I'd come to Lila's wedding out of duty the way I always did. Weddings, baptisms, funerals, always showing up, always hoping this time might be different. But when I walked in, my Aunt Clara, Lila's mother, had barely looked at me. Her smile was thin, a polite mask. "Harper, we're so full tonight." She'd set her hand fluttering toward the back of the room. "Just find a place to stand." A place. Like I was an afterthought, a piece of furniture to be shuffled out of sight. So I did what I always did. I found a corner near the service door where waiters glided in and out their trays, grazing my arm, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary curling around me. I stood there, my navy dress pressed smooth, my hair pinned back with care, and I watched them, my family, my blood, celebrate without me. They weren't cruel, not in the way you might think. Cruelty would have required them to see me to acknowledge I existed. Instead, they moved around me, their voices loud with pride, their stories polished like trophies. My brother Tom held court near the head table, his law firm's name dropping into every sentence like a coin in a fountain. Lila, radiant in her white gown, floated from guest to guest, her laughter a melody I couldn't join. And Clara, my aunt, orchestrated it all, her eyes sliding past me as if I were a ghost. Then I heard it, the words that sliced through the noise like a blade. "Poor Harper." My cousin Sarah whispered to her husband, her voice soft but not soft enough. They were standing just a few feet away, close enough for me to see the pity in her eyes. No husband, no kids, no anything. She's just... there isn't she. Her husband nodded, his expression a mix of boredom and agreement, as if my life were a sad footnote in their story. I pressed my lips together, my fingers digging into the cracked leather of my purse. I could have spoken up. I could have walked away, left the hall, let the night air cool the sting. But I stayed. My silence was louder than their words, heavier, a weight I'd carried for years. I'd learned long ago that fighting for a place among them only made the circle tighter, the chairs closer together. So I stood my spine straight, my eyes, tracing the swirls in the carpet, each loop a tiny maze I could lose myself in. I was good at being still, too good maybe. It was a skill I'd sharpened in places they'd never dream of, under pressures they'd never withstand. But they didn't know that. They didn't care to know. To them, I was Harper the spinster, the one who'd wasted her life, who appeared at family gatherings like a shadow and faded just as quietly. They didn't see the secrets I carried, the truth stitched into my bones, the oaths that bound me even now. The band shifted into a waltz, and Lila spun across the dance floor, her dress catching the light like a comet's tail. I watched her, and for a moment I let myself feel it, the ache, the loneliness, the way their dismissal pressed against my chest, a bruise that never faded. I'd been coming to these events for decades, always on the fringes, always the one they forgot to include. Stay out of the picture. Harper Clara had said years ago at a family reunion, her voice kind but firm as a photographer arranged us for a portrait. "We want the young ones up front." I'd stepped back then, just as I stepped back. Now my heart a steady pulse of endurance, each beat a reminder to keep going, to keep standing. But that night something stirred inside me, a flicker deep in my spine, sharp and unfamiliar. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a clarity cold and precise like the edge of a knife. I wasn't just Harper, the nobody they decided I was something else, something they'd never comprehend. Standing by the service door, the air thick with perfume, and the clatter of plates, I felt the weight of that truth settle over me. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of the end of my silence. I looked out at the room, at the faces that didn't see me, and I made a vow to myself. I'd keep enduring, keep showing up, but I wouldn't break. Not for them. Not ever. The waiters moved past their trays, flashing silver in the dim light, and I lifted my eyes to the ceiling where the chandelier's glow splintered into 1,000 tiny stars. I'd been in darker places than this, I told myself. I'd carried heavier burdens than their pity. I'm sharing this with you because this story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been pushed to the edges, whose worth has been questioned by the people who should have known better. If you've ever felt that ache, that quiet wound, I'm asking you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this journey, because I promise you it's not what you expect. There's a truth here, one I've held close for years, and it's time you heard it. This is how it began, with a wedding, a whisper, and a woman they thought they understood. The music swelled and I stood there, my purse clutched tight, my heart a locked box no one had ever tried to open. I didn't know then that the world was about to shift, that a man with stars on his shoulders would walk through a door and turn their whispers to silence. But I felt it, that flicker in my spine, and it was enough to keep me standing. For now, it was enough. I lingered in that corner, the service door creaking behind me, the waiter's footsteps, a soft rhythm against the chaos of the celebration. I thought of the years I'd spent like this, always on the outside, always the one they overlooked. I thought of the nights I'd lain awake replaying their words, their glances, the way they'd made me feel small. But I also thought of the other nights, the ones they'd never know, about nights spent in briefing rooms in deserts, in rooms so classified they didn't have names. Those nights had shaped me, hardened me, given me a strength they couldn't see. I watched Lila dance her joy, a light I couldn't touch, and I wondered just for a moment what it would feel like to be seen. Not pitied, not tolerated, but truly seen. The thought was dangerous. A spark that could ignite something I wasn't ready to face. So I pushed it down, locked it away, and focused on the carpet, the chandelier, the weight of my purse in my hands. I'd survived worse than this, I reminded myself. I'd carry this too. The night wore on, and I stayed in my corner, my presence as unnoticed as the wallpaper behind me. But that flicker in my spine didn't fade. It grew steady and sure, a quiet promise that something was coming. I didn't know what, not yet, but I felt it, and it was enough to keep me there standing tall, my heart beating like a drum only I could hear. The wedding reception faded into a blur, the chandelier's light softening as I leaned against the wall, my purse still clutched like a lifeline. The music pulsed. Lila's laughter rose and fell, but my mind slipped somewhere else, somewhere darker, quieter. I was good at slipping away at letting the world hum on without me. It was a trick I'd learned long ago in places where noise meant danger and silence meant survival. Standing there by the service door, I let myself go back, not all the way, not to the heart of it, but to the edges where the memories were sharp but bearable. I was 22 when I first learned what it meant to be invisible, not in a room like this, but in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. I'd been recruited straight out of college, my linguistics degree, catching the eye of someone in a suit who spoke in clipped sentences and never smiled. They didn't tell me much, just enough to make me curious. A program classified a chance to serve in ways most people never would. I was young, hungry for purpose, and I said yes before I understood what it meant. The training came first, a brutal crucible in a compound. I can't name somewhere the air smelled of pine and gunpowder. They woke us at 3 a.m., made us run until our lungs burned, taught us to read maps by starlight, to break codes, to hold our breath underwater until our vision blurred. I was the only woman in my cohort, and the men boys really watched me like I was a curiosity waiting for me to crack. I didn't. Not then. Not ever. I remember the first time I felt my old self slip away. It was during a night exercise, crouched in a ditch, mud caking my boots, my hands trembling from cold. The instructor, a man with eyes like flint, knelt beside me. "You're not Harper anymore," he said, his voice low, steady. "You're a shadow. Shadows don't flinch. Shadows don't feel." I knotted my jaw tight and I buried Harper, the girl who'd laughed at college parties, who'd dreamed of teaching, who'd cried when her dog died, somewhere deep where no one could find her. That was the beginning, the moment I started building the wall between who I was and who I had to be. The missions came later, after I'd proven myself, after the bruises and the sleepless nights and the tests I thought would break me. They sent me places I can't name, to do things I can't speak of even now. I carried messages no one else could slip through borders, like a ghost sat in rooms where the air was thick with secrets. I learned to listen, to watch, to move without being seen. I was good at it, too good maybe. They gave me a code name, one I still hear in my dreams sometimes, though I've tried to forget it. They gave me medals, too, pinned them on in windowless rooms, no cameras, no witnesses. For valor, they said, but the words felt hollow. Valor didn't keep you warm at night. Valor didn't fill the silence when you came home. I came home eventually after years of absences I couldn't explain. My family asked questions at first. Where had I been? Why didn't I call? What was I doing with my life? I gave them half-truths, vague stories about government work, desk jobs, nothing exciting. They stopped asking after a while, their curiosity replaced by indifference, then judgment. Harper's just odd, I overheard my brother Tom say once years ago at a Christmas dinner I'd barely spoken at. Always gone, never says why, probably nothing important. I let them think that. It was easier than the truth, safer. The oaths I'd sworn weren't just words, they were chains binding me to silence, even when it hurt. Standing at the wedding, the memory of those years pressed against me heavy as the air in that crowded hall. I'd been back in town for a decade now, living in a small house at the edge of it, working a part-time job at the library to fill the days. I kept to myself, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to be anyone else anymore. The woman who'd slipped through checkpoints, who'd memorized coordinates in the dark, didn't know how to make small talk at book clubs or laugh at barbecues. Sometimes late at night, I'd stand in my kitchen, the clock ticking too loud, and I'd forget I was ever anything but this quiet, overlooked woman they'd decided I was. I looked out at the reception, at Lila twirling in her dress, at Clara directing waiters with a flick of her wrist, and I felt the loneliness settle deeper, a stone in my chest. I'd given so much years, pieces of myself, things I'd never get back, and for what? To stand here in a corner listening to whispers that called me nothing. I pressed my hand against my purse, feeling the outline of a keychain inside a small metal star I'd kept from those days, a reminder of who I'd been. It was all I had left, that, and the memories, the ones that came unbidden now pulling me back. There was one night, one mission that I couldn't shake. It was years ago in a city where the air tasted of dust and fear. I'd been sent to retrieve something, papers, codes I can't say, and it went wrong. The kind of wrong where gunfire cracks the night open, where you run until your legs scream, where you make choices you'll carry forever. I got out barely, but not everyone did. I see their faces sometimes when I close my eyes, and I wonder if I could have done more, been faster, smarter. They told me I'd saved lives that night, that my work changed things, but all I felt was the weight of the ones I couldn't save. I came home after that, told them I was done. They let me go, but not really. The oaths, the secrets, they follow you. They become you. I blinked the reception, snapping back into focus. A waiter brushed past his tray, clinking, and I realized my cheeks were wet. I wiped them quickly, my fingers trembling, and forced myself to breathe. No one noticed. No one ever did. I was Harper, the nobody, the one who stood in corners and didn't make a fuss. But inside, I was something else, something they'd never see. The star in my purse pressed against my palm, and I held it like a talisman, a piece of the woman I used to be. I thought about leaving, slipping out the service door, letting the night swallow me. But I didn't. I stayed not because I wanted to, but because I'd learned to endure. Endurance was my strength. My shield, the thing that had carried me through training, through missions, through years of being unseen. I looked at my family, at the faces that didn't know me, and I felt that flicker in my spine again, the one from the night before, sharper, now insistent. It wasn't just clarity anymore, it was a warning, a whisper that something was coming. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it's like to carry a past no one sees, to live with a truth you can't share. If you're still with me, if you've ever felt that weight, I'm asking you to keep listening. This story isn't just about a wedding or a woman in a corner. It's about what happens when the world finally sees you for who you are. Hit that subscribe button. Stay with me because the truth is coming and it's bigger than you think. The band played on and I stood there, my purse in my hands, my heart a vault of secrets. I didn't know then that the door was about to open, that a man with power in his stride would walk in and change everything. But I felt it, that flicker, growing into a flame, and it was enough to keep me standing, to keep me waiting for what came next. The wedding reception was weeks behind me, but its echoes lingered sharp as the winter wind that rattled my windows now. I sat at my kitchen table, a mug of tea gone cold in my hands, the clock on the wall ticking too loud. My house was small, tucked at the edge of town, its walls lined with books I'd read a dozen times, their pages softer than the world outside. I lived quietly, deliberately, the way you do, when you've learned that drawing attention only invites questions you can't answer. But quiet didn't mean peace. Quiet was just another way to carry the weight. I'm Harper Moore, and I'm telling you this because I want you to know what it's like to live in a town that thinks it knows you, that's decided you're less than the sum of their stories. At 48, I was the woman they called spinster, behind my back sometimes to my face, their voices dripping with pity or scorn. Poor Harper, they'd say, as if my life were a cautionary tale, a warning to younger women about what happens when you don't marry, don't shine, don't fit. I worked part-time at the library, shelving books, helping kids with their homework, smiling at patrons who barely looked at me. It was enough to pay the bills to keep the world at arm's length, but it wasn't enough to stop the whispers. They didn't whisper at the grocery store, not always. Sometimes they spoke loud enough for me to hear their voices carrying over the canned goods. "She's always alone," a woman said. Once a mother from Lila's circle, her cart full of snacks for a birthday party I hadn't been invited to. No family, no life, just Harper. Her friend nodded her eyes, flicking to me as I weighed apples in the produce aisle. I kept my gaze on the fruit, my fingers steady, but inside their words were a fist against my ribs. I wanted to turn to tell them they were wrong, that I'd lived a life bigger than their small minds could hold. But I didn't. I paid for my apples, walked home, and let the silence swallow me. My family was worse in their way. They didn't need to whisper, they dismissed me with glances, with the way they filled a room with their own importance. My brother Tom came by sometimes, usually when he needed something, a signature on a document, a favor he'd never repay. He'd sit in my living room, his suit crisp, his voice loud with stories of his law firm, his clients, his life. "You should get out more, Harper." He'd say, his tone half advice, half judgment. "Do something with yourself." I'd nod, pour him coffee, let him talk until he left his car kicking up gravel as he drove away. He never asked about me, not really. He didn't want to know. The younger women in town were the hardest to bear, not because they were cruel, but because they were careless. At the library, they'd come in groups, their voices bright, their lives laid out like open books, engagements, pregnancies, careers they wore like badges. They'd talk over me, around me, as if I were part of the furniture. One of them, a girl named Emily, barely 25, had laughed once when I handed her a book she'd requested. "You're so sweet, Harper." She'd set her tone the kind you'd use with a child. "Do you just live for this? The library, I mean?" Her friends giggled and I smiled, my lips tight, my heart a stone. "Something like that," I said and turned away, shelving books to hide the heat in my cheeks. But I was kind even when it hurt. I helped Emily find more books, recommended titles for her book club, listened when she rambled about her wedding plans. I brought cookies to the library for the kids' story hour, stayed late to clean up, smiled at the patrons who called me that library lady instead of my name. Kindness was my armor, my way of proving they hadn't broken me. It was also my rebellion, a quiet refusal to let their scorn define me. I'd learned that, in the hardest places where kindness was a choice, not a weakness where a shared canteen or a whispered word could mean the difference between life and death. They didn't know that about me. They never would. I thought about those days sometimes when the library was empty and the only sound was the hum of the heater. I'd sit at the desk, my hands idle, and I'd remember the weight of a radio in my hands, the crackle of a voice giving coordinates the way my pulse stayed steady even when the world was falling apart. I'd remember the faces, too, the ones I couldn't save, the ones who trusted me to get them out. Those memories were a wound that never closed, but they were also a fire, a reminder of who I'd been. I wasn't just Harper, the nobody. I was something else. Something I kept locked away like the star-shaped keychain in my purse, its edges worn from years of being held. The town had its rhythms, its gatherings, and I went to them not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop trying. There was a church potluck one Sunday, the kind where everyone brought a dish and their pride. I brought a casserole, a recipe I'd learned from my mother, and set it on the table, its edges still warm. Clara was there, her voice loud as she boasted about Lila's new job, her new life. "She's going places," Clara said, her eyes sweeping the room, never landing on me. I stood by the dessert table, a plate of untouched food in my hands, and listened as others chimed in stories of their kids, their grandkids, their lives that mattered. No one asked about me. No one offered me a seat. Then Sarah, my cousin, the one who'd whispered at the wedding, approached, her smile too bright. "Harper, you're so good at these things," she said, gesturing to the potluck. "Always helping out, always. Here." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Here as in nowhere else, here as in nothing more. I nodded, my smile a mask. "Just doing my part," I said, and turned to refill the punch bowl, my hand steady, my heart, a drumbeat of restraint. I wanted to scream, to tell her I'd been places she'd never imagined, done things she'd never understand. But I didn't. I poured the punch, smiled at the kids who ran by, and let the moment pass. That night, alone in my house, I stood at the sink, washing dishes, the water scalding my hands. I thought about Sarah's words, Clara's indifference, Emily's laughter. I thought about Tom, who hadn't called in weeks, and the town that saw me as a shadow. The star keychain sat on the counter, glinting under the kitchen light, and I picked it up, its edges pressing into my palm. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was back there, crouched in the dark, my breath shallow, my mind sharp as a blade. I'd been more than this once. I was still more, even if they couldn't see it. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it's like to endure, to carry a truth no one wants to see. If you've ever been called less than you are, if you've ever smiled through the pain, I'm asking you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button. Keep listening, because this story is about more than a woman in a small town. It's about what happens when the world finally sees you, when the silence breaks. The truth is coming, and it's closer than you think. I put the keychain down, dried my hands, and turned off the light. The house was quiet, but that flicker in my spine was still there, growing a flame that wouldn't go out. I didn't know then that the next gathering, a formal gala the town was buzzing about, would change everything. I didn't know that a man with power in his voice would walk in and call my name. But I felt it, and it was enough to keep me going, to keep me waiting for what was next. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, its gold-embossed edges curling slightly in the damp air of early spring. Annual Willow Creek Gala. It read the town's biggest event, a night of polished shoes and polished egos where everyone who was anyone came to be seen. I wasn't anyone not to them, and I almost tossed the card in the trash. But something stopped me. Maybe the memory of my mother who'd loved these gatherings, or maybe that stubborn flicker in my spine, the one that refused to let me disappear completely. So I kept it, let it sit there, a quiet challenge I wasn't sure I'd answer. I'm Harper Moore, and I'm telling you this because I need you to feel what it's like to walk into a room where you're already forgotten, where your presence is a formality, not a gift. The gala was a week away, and I spent those days wrestling with myself. I didn't belong there, not among the town's elite, my brother Tom, with his law firm's name on everyone's lips, my Aunt Clara, who chaired every committee, or the younger women like Emily who'd be draped in dresses that cost more than my monthly rent. I was the library lady, the spinster, the one they pitied or ignored. Why go? Why subject myself to another night of standing in corners, my heart a bruise that never healed? But politeness is a chain, and I'd been bound by it my whole life. Clara had called her voice bright but perfunctory, insisting I come. It's for the community, Harper, she'd said, as if my absence would be a mark against her, not me. I heard the subtext show up, but don't make a fuss, don't take up space. I said yes because saying no would have required explaining, and I was too tired for that. So I dug out my old navy dress, the one I'd worn to Lila's wedding, ironed it until the creases were sharp, and pinned my hair with the same care I'd once used to check a map in the dark. I told myself it was just one night. I could endure one night. The gala was held at the town's civic center, a sprawling building with marble floors and chandeliers that glittered like promises. I arrived early, my purse clutched tight, the star-shaped keychain inside pressing against my palm. The air smelled of lilies and wax, and the room was already filling with people, men in tuxedos, women in gowns, their laughter a current I couldn't swim in. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart thudding, my eyes scanning for a place to hide. A young usher barely out of high school glanced at my invitation and pointed to the back. "Over there, ma'am," he said, his voice polite but distracted. I knotted my lips a tight line and made my way to a table in the corner, half hidden by a pillar where the chairs were mismatched and the tablecloth slightly stained. I sat my hands folded in my lap and watched the room come alive. Clara was at the front, her silver dress catching the light as she greeted guests, her smile a beacon. Tom was nearby, shaking hands, his voice booming with stories of his latest case. Emily and her friends floated through the crowd, their laughter sharp, their dresses shimmering like they'd stepped out of a magazine. I recognized others, Sarah, my cousin, who'd called me just here at the potluck, the grocery store mother who'd pitied my loneliness, the library patrons who never remembered my name. They moved in orbits I couldn't touch their lives, a constellation I'd never belonged to. The gala was a fundraiser supposedly for a new community center, but it felt like a stage for the town to applaud itself. Speeches began, the mayor droning on about Progress Clara, thanking sponsors with practiced grace. I listened, my eyes on the tablecloth, tracing its faint stains with my finger. No one spoke to me, not even the others at my table. A retired teacher, an elderly man who coughed into his napkin, a woman who kept checking her phone. I was invisible just as I'd always been, and the weight of it pressed against my chest, heavier than ever. Then it happened, the moment that cut deeper than the rest. Sarah approached her gown, a deep emerald, her husband trailing behind. She stopped near my table not to speak to me, but to chat with someone at the next table over. Her voice carried bright and careless. "Oh, Lila's doing so well," she said, her words meant for her friend, but landing like shrapnel. "She's got that new job in the city, and her husband's just perfect. Not like some people you know, just stuck." Her friend laughed a soft, knowing sound, and Sarah's eyes flicked to me, just for a second long enough for me to see the pity, the dismissal. She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. I was the some people, the stuck, the nothing. I pressed my hands together, my nails digging into my palms, and forced myself to breathe. I wanted to stand, to walk out, to let the night air wash away the sting. But I stayed my spine straight. My face, a mask of calm. I'd learned to endure worse than this nights, without sleep missions, where a single mistake meant death. Moments when the world hung on my silence. This was nothing I told myself. Just words, just glances, just another night of being unseen. But the lie didn't hold. It hurt deeper than I wanted to admit, and the flicker in my spine flared hot and restless, urging me to do something, anything to break the chain. I reached for my purse, my fingers brushing the star keychain, and I held it under the table, its edges grounding me. I thought of the places it had been, desert safe houses, rooms where my voice had mattered. I thought of the woman I'd been, the one who'd walked through fire and come out whole. She was still in me somewhere, buried under years of silence and small-town scorn. I closed my eyes just for a moment and let myself remember her, let her strength steady me. I could do this. I could sit through one more night. The speeches ended and the band started a soft jazz that filled the room with warmth. People moved to the dance floor, their laughter rising, their lives on display. I stayed where I was, my purse in my lap, my heart a locked box. Clara circulated her smile, never faltering, and I caught her eye once, just once. She nodded a quick, polite gesture, then turned away. Her attention pulled to someone more important. Tom danced with his wife, their steps, practiced, their smiles, perfect. Emily and her friends giggled near the bar, their voices carrying over the music. And I sat alone in the back, the pillar casting a shadow over my table. I thought about leaving, slipping out before the night got too long, before the weight became too much. But something held me there. Not just politeness, not just duty, but that flicker, that flame in my spine that wouldn't let me run. I didn't know what it was, not yet, but it felt like a promise, a whisper that this night wasn't like the others. I looked at the room, at the faces that didn't see me, and I made a choice. I'd stay not for them, but for me. For the woman I'd been, the one they'd never know. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it's like to sit in a room full of people who think you're nothing, to feel their judgment, like a weight you can't shake. If you've ever been pushed to the edges, if you've ever wondered if your worth matters, I'm asking you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, keep listening, because this story is about more than a gala or a woman in the back. It's about what happens when the world turns upside down, when the truth steps into the light. It's coming closer now, and you won't want to miss it. The music played on, and I sat there, my hands steady, my heart a drumbeat of endurance. I didn't know then that the door was about to open, that a man with stars on his shoulders would walk in and call my name. But I felt it, that flame burning brighter, and it was enough to keep me there waiting for what came next. The jazz band softened the notes, trailing into a murmur, as if the room itself had taken a breath. I sat at my corner table, the pillar's shadow cool against my shoulder, my purse resting in my lap like a shield. The gala had settled into its rhythm, laughter rising, glasses clinking the dance floor, a swirl of silk and starlight. I'd grown used to the noise, to the way it wrapped around me, leaving me untouched. My fingers brushed the star-shaped keychain inside my purse, its edges a quiet reminder of who I'd been, who I still was, even if no one else saw it. I was Harper Moore, and I was enduring just as I always had. I'm telling you this because I need you to feel what it's like when the world shifts under your feet, when the air changes, and you know before you understand why that nothing will be the same. The gala was in full swing. Clara gliding from table to table, her silver dress catching the chandelier's light, Tom laughing too loudly at the bar, Emily and her friends posing for photos near the stage. I watched them, my heart a steady pulse, my face a mask of calm. I decided to stay, not for them, but for that flicker in my spine, the one that had grown into a flame burning brighter with every slight, every whispered judgment. I didn't know what it meant, but it held me there, rooted, waiting. Then the doors opened. Not the service doors behind me where waiters slipped in and out, but the main entrance wide and framed in gold, the kind that announced importance. A murmur rippled through the room, heads turning, conversations faltering. I didn't look up at first, my eyes fixed on the tablecloth, its faint stains, a map I'd memorized. But the air changed, heavy with anticipation, and I felt it a prickle at the back of my neck, the kind I'd known in darker places when instinct told you to pay attention. I lifted my gaze, and there he was. A man stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the light from the hall. He wore a suit, not a tuxedo, but it carried authority, the kind that didn't need flash. His shoulders were broad, his posture military straight, and the room seemed to shrink around him. Behind him, two others followed, men in dark suits, their eyes scanning the crowd, their movements precise. The band faltered, the saxophone trailing off, and a hush fell, broken only by the clink of a glass. Someone sat down too quickly. Clara froze mid-step, her smile flickering. Tom turned from the bar, his brow creasing. Emily and her friends stopped posing their phones, lowering their giggles, silenced. I didn't know him, not at first. His face was unfamiliar, lined with years, and resolve, his hair gray at the temples. But I knew the weight he carried, the kind that came with power, with decisions that shaped lives. I'd seen it before in briefing rooms, in places where names weren't shared, only ranks. My heart thudded, not with fear, but with something else, recognition maybe, or the ghost of a life I'd buried. I pressed my hands together under the table, my nails digging into my palms, and forced myself to stay still. This wasn't about me, I told myself. It couldn't be. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking on the marble floor, and the crowd parted their whispers, a low hum. Clara recovered first, hurrying toward him. Her hands outstretched, her voice bright but strained. "Welcome, sir. We're so honored," she began. But he raised a hand, polite but firm, and she stopped, her smile faltering. He didn't look at her, didn't look at anyone, his eyes sweeping the room with a purpose that made my chest tighten. I knew that look. I'd seen it in commanders, in operatives, in people who didn't stop until they found what they were after. And then impossibly, his gaze landed on me. The room seemed to tilt, the chandelier's light blurring at the edges. I froze, my breath, caught my fingers tightening around the keychain in my purse. He couldn't be looking at me, not here, not now, not in this corner where I'd made myself small. But he was. His eyes, sharp and steady, held mine, and for a moment the world narrowed to just us, the man in the suit and the woman in the back, the nobody they'd all dismissed. He started walking his steps, deliberate, the two men behind him keeping pace. The crowd parted further, their whispers growing a mix of curiosity and confusion. Clara's face paled. Tom's jaw tightened. Emily's eyes widened. I wanted to look away, to sink into the shadow of the pillar, but I couldn't. That flicker in my spine was a fire now, roaring, and I couldn't move. He stopped at my table so close I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the weight of years in his expression. The room was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, heavy and expectant. My table mates, the retired teacher, the coughing man, the phone-checking woman stared, their mouths slightly open. I felt their eyes, felt the eyes of the entire room, but I kept mine on him. My heart a drumbeat I couldn't slow. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but clear, carrying a reverence that made my throat tighten. "Ma'am," he said, and the word was a lifeline, a weight, a door swinging open. "We've been looking for you." The words hung in the air, simple but seismic, and I felt the room shift the ground beneath me unsteady. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My voice lost somewhere deep, buried under years of silence. I wanted to say he was mistaken, that I was just Harper, the library lady, the spinster, the nobody. But the way he looked at me, the way his eyes held mine, told me he wasn't mistaken. He knew exactly who I was, and that knowledge was a blade cutting through the life I'd built to hide her. I glanced at Clara standing frozen a few feet away, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Tom was closer now, his face a mask of confusion, his wife clutching his arm. Emily and her friends were staring, their phones forgotten, their expressions a mix of shock and something else, envy maybe, or fear. Sarah was there too, her emerald gown suddenly too bright, her eyes darting between me and the man, searching for an explanation she couldn't find. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to run, but I did none of those things. I sat my spine straight, my hands trembling under the table, and I met his gaze. Who are you? I managed my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried in the silence sharp and raw. I needed to hear it, needed to know this was real, that I wasn't dreaming in the dark of my small house, the clock ticking too loud. He straightened, his expression softening, but his voice was steady, resonant, the kind that filled a room without trying. "I'm Robert Callahan, Secretary of Defense," he said, and the words landed like a thunderclap, gasps rippling through the crowd. "And you, ma'am, are someone we've owed a debt to for a long time." The room spun, the chandelier's light fracturing into stars, and I gripped the keychain so hard it bit into my palm. Secretary of Defense. The title was a weight, a truth, a door to a past I'd locked away. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he had the wrong woman, but the fire in my spine wouldn't let me. It burned fierce and unrelenting, and I knew in that moment that the life I'd hidden was about to step into the light. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it's like when the world sees you, really sees you for the first time. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered if your truth matters, I'm asking you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, keep listening, because this story is about more than a gala or a man in a suit. It's about what happens when the silence breaks, when the past comes calling. It's here now, and you won't believe what comes next. The band was silent, the room still, and I sat there, my heart racing, my eyes locked on his. I didn't know then what he'd say next, what name he'd call me, what truth he'd reveal. But I felt it, that fire in my spine, and it was enough to keep me there, waiting for the world to change. The silence in the gala was a living thing pressing against my skin, heavy with the weight of every eye in the room. I sat at my corner table, the pillar's shadow no longer a refuge, my hands trembling under the table where I clutched the star-shaped keychain. Secretary of Defense Robert Callahan stood before me, his presence a force that held the crowd captive. His words, "We've been looking for you," still ringing in my ears. My heart pounded a drumbeat. I couldn't quiet, and the fire in my spine roared, urging me to stand, to speak, to meet this moment. But I was Harper Moore, the nobody, the library lady, and the truth he carried felt too big, too bright for the woman I'd let myself become. I'm telling you this because I need you to feel what it's like when your past crashes into your present, when the life you've hidden is laid bare before people who never cared to see you. The chandelier's light fractured above, casting slivers of gold across the marble floor, and the room was frozen. Every breath held, every glance pinned on me. Clara stood a few feet away, her silver dress dull in the stillness, her hands clasped so tightly they shook. Tom was closer, his face pale, his eyes searching mine for answers he didn't have. Emily and her friends were statues, their phones limp in their hands, their laughter gone. Sarah in her emerald gown looked like she'd been slapped, her mouth slightly open, her pity replaced by something I couldn't name. Callahan's eyes never left mine, and in them I saw something that made my throat tighten. Respect. Not pity, not judgment, but the kind of respect that comes from knowing what someone has carried. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but resonant, carrying to every corner of the room. "Colonel Harper Jane Moore," he said, and the words were a thunderbolt cracking open the silence. "Codename Starlight. It's an honor to stand in your presence." The room gasped a collective intake of breath that sucked the air from my lungs. Colonel. Codename. Starlight. The words were mine, but they felt foreign, like relics from a life I'd buried under years of silence and small-town scorn. I shook my head, a small, instinctive movement, my voice barely a whisper. "You've got the wrong person." I said my words trembling, my eyes darting to the tablecloth, to the stains I'd traced 100 times. "I'm just Harper. Nobody special." But Callahan didn't waver. He straightened, his expression softening, but his voice was firm, reverent, the kind that commanded attention without trying. "With all due respect, ma'am, you're wrong about that. You're a legend. Your service, your sacrifice. It's the reason many of us are here tonight. The reason I'm here." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, daring anyone to contradict him, then back to me, steady and sure. "We've owed you this moment for a long time." The room was a tomb, the silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. Clara's hands dropped to her sides, her face a mask of shock. Tom took a step forward, then stopped, his mouth working, but no words coming. Emily's friends whispered, their voices sharp with disbelief, but Emily herself was silent, her eyes wide, her confidence shattered. Sarah's husband put a hand on her arm as if to steady her, but she didn't move, her gaze locked on me, searching for the woman she'd dismissed as stuck. I wanted to shrink, to slip through the floor, to be anywhere but here, but the fire in my spine wouldn't let me. It burned fierce and unrelenting, and I knew this was the moment I'd been running from, the moment I couldn't escape. I closed my eyes just for a second, and I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold where the air tasted of dust and fear. It was 15 years ago, a mission that had defined me, broken me, made me who I was. I was Starlight, then a colonel in a covert unit, tasked with extracting a team from a city that had turned to ash. The details are classified even now, but I can tell you this: it was a night of gunfire and shadows, where every choice was a gamble, every step a prayer. I'd been sent in alone, my radio crackling with voices that grew fainter as the hours passed. The team was trapped, pinned down, and I was their only chance. I moved through alleys, my breath shallow, my hands steady my mind, a blade honed by years of training. I found them, got them out, but not all of them. 2 didn't make it, their faces burned into my memory, their names a weight I'd carry forever. I'd saved 8 lives that night, stopped a crisis that could have spiraled into war. They told me later in a windowless room that my actions had changed history, that I'd done the impossible. They pinned a medal on me, one I'd never shown anyone, one that sat in a locked box in my attic. But all I could think of was the 2 I'd lost, the ones I couldn't save. I'd come home after that, told them I was done, but the truth was I'd never left that night. It lived in me, in the star keychain, in the silence I'd wrapped around myself like armor. I opened my eyes and the gala was still there, the room still silent, Callahan still standing before me. His words had torn open that locked box, and I felt exposed raw, every scar visible. I wanted to tell him to stop, to take it back, to let me be Harper the nobody, but he didn't. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it, revealing a pin, silver and simple, shaped like a star. "This is for you." He said, his voice softer now, but still carrying that reverence. "A small token from a grateful nation. We should have given it to you years ago. I stared at the pin, my vision blurring my throat so tight I could barely breathe. I shook my head again, my voice breaking. I don't deserve this. I was just doing my job. But he smiled a small, knowing smile and placed the box on the table. His hand steady, his eyes never leaving mine. You did more than your job, Colonel. You saved lives. You changed the world, and we will never forget it. The room was a blur now, the faces a sea of shock and shame. Clara's eyes were wet, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her mouth. Tom was closer, his face gray, his eyes searching mine like he was seeing me for the first time. Emily's friends were whispering their voices abuzz, but Emily herself was still her gaze locked on the pin, her confidence gone. Sarah's husband was pulling her back, but she resisted her eyes on me. Her pity replaced by something else, regret maybe, or awe. I felt their stares, their silence, their realization, and it was too much, too heavy, too late. I looked at Callahan, at the pin, at the room that had judged me, and the fire in my spine cracked open, a flood of pain and pride I couldn't hold back. I didn't cry, not then, but my voice when I spoke was raw, a wound laid bare. I never wanted this. I said the words for him, for them, for the woman I'd been. I just wanted to do what was right. He nodded, his eyes softening, and in that moment I saw the man behind the title, the one who understood what it cost to carry a truth like mine. You did, he said, his voice a lifeline, and you are. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like when the world finally sees you, when the truth you've carried becomes a light no one can ignore. If you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever felt your worth questioned, I'm asking you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, keep listening, because this story is about more than a pin or a title. It's about what happens when the silence breaks, when the past becomes the present. It's not over, not yet, and you won't believe what comes next. The room was still silent, the pin glinting on the table, and I sat there, my heart exposed, my past alive. I didn't know then how they'd react, how the night would end, but I felt it, that fire in my spine, and it was enough to keep me there, facing the truth I'd run from for so long. The gala was no longer a gala. It was a reckoning, a room stripped of its glitter, its laughter, its pride, and left raw in the wake of truth. I sat at my corner table, the silver star pin glinting before me, its weight heavier than the velvet box that held it. Secretary of Defense Robert Callahan stood at my side, his presence a shield, his words, Colonel Harper Jane Moore, codename Starlight still echoing in the silence. The chandelier's light felt dimmer now, the marble floor colder, the air thick with the shock of a room that had misjudged me for years. My hands rested on my lap, the star-shaped keychain pressed against my palm, its edges a lifeline to the woman I'd been, the woman I was now forced to face. I'm telling you this because I need you to feel what it's like when the world you've endured turns inside out, when the people who dismissed you are forced to see you not as they wanted, but as you are. The room was a tableau of frozen faces. Clara, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaking her mascara. Tom, my brother, standing rigid, his eyes wide with something like guilt. Emily and her friends, their phones forgotten, their confidence shattered. Sarah, my cousin, her emerald gown a stark contrast to the pallor of her face. They stared not at the pin, not at Callahan, but at me, and their gazes were a weight I'd never wanted to carry. Callahan stepped back just a fraction, his posture still military straight, but his eyes softened as he gestured to the room. This woman, he said, his voice steady, resonant, has served this nation in ways most of us will never fully understand. Her courage, her sacrifice have saved lives, protected our freedom. Tonight we honor her. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, daring anyone to look away, then back to me, a quiet reverence in his expression. Colonel Moore, please stand. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed to stay seated, to shrink back into the shadow of the pillar, to let this moment pass. But the fire in my spine, that flame that had burned through years of silence, wouldn't let me. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of its legs loud in the stillness, and stood my navy dress feeling too thin, my hands trembling at my sides. The room shifted, a ripple of movement as people rose to their feet, first the mayor, then the council members, then the crowd, a slow wave of respect that felt surreal, like a dream I didn't trust. I kept my eyes on Callahan, on the pin, on anything but the faces that had judged me, pitied me, erased me. The band, silent until now, struck a single note, a low, solemn chord that vibrated through the room. Callahan reached for the pin, lifting it from its velvet box, and stepped closer. "This is not a medal," he said, his voice softer, now meant for me, but carrying to the crowd. "Your medals are already yours, earned in places we cannot name. This is a symbol, a reminder of what you've given and what we owe you." He pinned it to my dress, his fingers precise, and as the medal touched my chest, I felt a crack in the wall. I'd built a flood of pain and pride I couldn't hold back. He stepped back, and then in a gesture that stole my breath, he saluted. A full, crisp salute. His hand steady, his eyes locked on mine. The men behind him, the ones in dark suits, followed suit. Their salutes a mirror of his, and I felt the room tilt the weight of their respect, a force I hadn't prepared for. I wanted to look away to hide, but I didn't. I stood, my spine straight, my heart a storm, and I returned the salute, my hand trembling, but sure the motion as natural as breathing even after all these years. The crowd was on its feet now, some clapping, others silent, their faces, a mix of awe and shame. I saw the mayor wipe his eyes, the retired teacher at my table nod with quiet pride. The elderly man who'd coughed all night stand straighter, as if he'd known all along. But it was my family, my blood, who cut the deepest. Clara took a step forward, her hands reaching out, then falling, her tears, falling unchecked. Tom was beside her, his face gray, his mouth moving as if to speak, but no words came. Emily and her friends were still, their eyes, wide, their youth no longer a shield. And Sarah was the one who broke the silence. She pushed past her husband, her gown rustling, and approached my table, her face flushed, her eyes wet. "Harper," she said, her voice cracking loud enough for the room to hear. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I never meant." She stopped, her hands twisting together, her apology, a tangle of regret and desperation. I looked at her, at the woman who'd called me stuck, who'd whispered poor Harper at the wedding, who dismissed me as nothing. I saw the shame in her eyes, the need for absolution, and I felt the old wound open, the years of their scorn pressing against my ribs. I could have spoken, could have told her how her words had hurt, how her pity had been a blade. I could have told her about the nights I'd lain awake replaying her whispers, or the missions I'd survived, the lives I'd saved. But I didn't. I looked at her, my eyes steady, my silence louder than any words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was enough. My silence said what I couldn't. I don't need your regret. I never did. She faltered, her hands dropping, and stepped back, her husband pulling her away. Her apology left unfinished. The room was still standing, the applause fading into a hush, and I felt the weight of their eyes, their realization, their regret. Clara moved next her steps, unsteady, her voice a whisper. "Harper, why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her tears falling faster now. "We didn't know." I looked at her, at the aunt who'd waved me to the back, who'd told me to stay out of the picture, and I felt the crack in my heart widen. I wanted to tell her I hadn't told them because they'd never asked, because they'd decided I was nothing long before I'd given them a chance. But I didn't. I nodded just once and let my silence speak again. Tom was last, his face a map of guilt, his hands clenched at his sides. "Harper," he said, his voice rough, I'm proud of you." The words were a knife sharp with everything they hadn't been for years. Proud. He'd never said it, not when I came home, not when I showed up to his events, not when I stood in his shadow. I looked at him. My brother, the man who'd filled rooms with his own importance, and I felt the weight of all the years I'd wanted to hear those words. But now, they felt hollow. Too late. I nodded again, my lips a tight line, and turned my eyes to the pin, to Callahan, to the truth that didn't need his pride. The band started again, a soft melody, and the room began to move. People approaching, their voices low, their hands outstretched. They wanted to shake my hand, to thank me to be part of this moment, but I stayed where I was, my hands at my sides, my heart too full to speak. Callahan remained nearby, a quiet guardian, and when he caught my eye, he nodded a small gesture that said he understood. He understood the cost of this moment, the weight of being seen after so long in the dark. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like when the world bends toward you, when the people who hurt you see their mistakes, not because you fought, but because the truth was bigger than their scorn. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever carried a truth no one saw, I'm asking you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button. Keep listening, because this story is about more than a salute or a pin. It's about what happens when you stand in your truth, when the silence becomes a song. One part left, and you won't want to miss it. The gala was ending, the crowd dispersing, but I stood there, the pin on my dress, the fire in my spine, a quiet flame now steady and sure. I didn't know then how I'd walk out of this room, how I'd face the days ahead. But I felt it, that moment of reverence, and it was enough to carry me forward into the light I'd never sought, but could no longer avoid. The gala's lights had dimmed the chandeliers, casting a soft glow over the emptying room. The marble floor was scattered with confetti, the tables littered with half-empty glasses, the air heavy with the fading scent of lilies and wine. I stood near the pillar that had been my refuge, the silver star pin still on my navy dress, its weight a quiet anchor. Secretary of Defense Robert Callahan had left his handshake firm, his final words, "You've done enough, Colonel. Rest now," lingering like a benediction. The crowd had dispersed, some with hurried goodbyes, others with lingering glances, their eyes carrying a mix of awe and shame. I was alone again, but not the same. Something had shifted, not in the room, but in me. I'm Harper Moore, and I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to come home to yourself, to stand in a truth you never meant to share, and find peace not in their applause, but in your own spine. The gala was over, but its echoes followed me as I walked out into the night, my heels clicking on the pavement, the spring air cool against my skin. My purse was lighter now, the star-shaped keychain tucked inside no longer a secret I had to clutch so tightly. The town was quiet, the streets empty, and I walked home, my steps steady my heart, a drumbeat of something new, not triumph, not revenge, but grace. The days that followed were strange, like waking from a dream you didn't know you'd been living. The town didn't forget, not right away. At the library, patrons looked at me differently, their smiles hesitant, their voices softer. We heard about the gala Harper. One said, an older woman who'd once called me that library lady, "You're incredible." I nodded, shelved her books, and said little, my silence no longer a shield but a choice. Kids at story hour asked if I was a hero, their eyes wide, and I smiled, told them heroes were just people who did what needed doing. I didn't tell them about the nights I'd spent in shadows, the lives I'd saved, the ones I'd lost. I didn't need to. The truth lived in me, not in their questions. My family tried to bridge the gap, their efforts clumsy, heavy with guilt. Clara called, her voice thick with tears, inviting me to dinner, promising a seat at the head of the table. We didn't know Harper, she said again and again, as if repetition could erase the years. I went not for her, but for the memory of my mother who'd loved her sister despite her flaws. The dinner was quiet. Clara's smiles forced her stories about Lila trailing off when I didn't respond. Tom was there, his suit less crisp, his voice less certain. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in years. "I should have asked about you." I nodded, sipped my water, and let the silence answer. I didn't need their apologies, not anymore. I'd carried their scorn too long to trade it for their regret. Sarah was the hardest. She came to the library one morning, her emerald gown replaced by jeans, her confidence gone. "Harper," she said, her hands twisting, her eyes wet. "I was awful. I didn't know who you were." I looked at her. The cousin who'd whispered, poor Harper, who'd called me stuck, and I felt the old wound, but it was softer now, less raw. "You didn't need to know," I said, my voice steady, my words simple. I did. She blinked, her tears falling, and left without another word. I watched her go, my hands folding a bookmark, my heart quiet. I didn't hate her. I didn't need to forgive her. I was free. The town's attention faded, as it always does. Emily and her friends stopped staring, their giggles, returning their lives, moving on. The grocery store mother nodded at me now, her pity gone, but her distance remained. The mayor sent a letter thanking me for my service, and the local paper ran a small story calling me a hidden hero. I didn't read it. I didn't need their words to tell me who I was. I went back to my life-shelving books, watering the plants in my small house, walking the quiet streets at dusk. But it wasn't the same life. The fire in my spine had settled, no longer a blaze, but a steady glow, a warmth that carried me through the days. One evening I went to my attic, the air thick with dust and memory. I opened the locked box I'd kept hidden, the one with my medals, my papers, the fragments of starlight I'd buried. I took out a flag small and folded one they'd given me after that mission. 15 years ago, the one where I'd saved 8, but lost 2. I held it, my fingers tracing its creases, and I felt the weight of that night, the gunfire, the shadows, the choices I'd made. I didn't cry, but I let myself feel it, all of it, the pride, the pain, the truth. Then I folded the flag slowly, deliberately, each crease a prayer for the ones I'd lost, for the woman I'd been, for the woman I was now. I placed it back in the box, locked it, and carried it downstairs, not to hide, but to keep close. I stood in my kitchen, the clock ticking softly, the star pin on my counter, its silver catching the light. I thought about the gala, about Callahan's salute, about the room that had stood for me, not because I'd asked, but because the truth was bigger than their scorn. I thought about Clara, Tom, Sarah, Emily, the town that had decided I was nothing, and I realized I didn't need their reverence, their regret, their pride. I'd carried my truth all along in my spine, in my silence, in the star I'd never let go. It was enough. I'm telling you this because I need you to know that you don't need to explain your past to anyone. It lives in your spine, in the quiet strength you carry, in the choices you've made when no one was watching. You don't need a room to stand for you, a pin to prove your worth, a title to make you whole. You are enough just as you are, and no one can take that from you. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever wondered if your truth matters, I'm asking you to hold on to it, to let it burn in you, steady and sure. You don't need to shout it. It's there in every step you take, in every breath you draw. I picked up the star pin, its edges smooth from Callahan's hands, and I held it for a moment, its weight a reminder, not a burden. Then I walked to my front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The night was clear, the stars bright above, and I stood on my porch, my head held high, my heart full. I didn't need to be Starlight anymore, didn't need to be Colonel Moore, didn't need to be the hero they'd finally seen. I was Harper, and that was enough. I closed the door behind me, the lock clicking softly, and I knew I'd carry this moment, this peace, for the rest of my days. The world had seen me, but more importantly, I'd seen myself, and in that quiet, sacred space, I was home. I'm telling you this because this story isn't just mine, it's yours. If you've ever stood in the shadows, if you've ever carried a truth no one else could see, hit that subscribe button, share this journey, because it's not over. Your truth is waiting, and it's more powerful than you know. Thank you for staying with me, for listening, for seeing me. Now go and let your own light shine.